Okay, so get this, listeners. Today, we're diving deep into this story about Enoch Burke. You know, the Irish teacher who was just released from prison.
It's been everywhere.
It has. And the more you look into it, the more complicated it gets.
Yeah, this is not your average teacher gets caught up in a legal case kind of thing.
Right.
This whole thing started because he refused to use a transgender student's preferred pronouns.
Hmm.
He's claiming that it goes against his religious beliefs, but the school saw it as him just flat out defying them.
Yeah.
And, well, you know the rest of the story, right? He ended up in prison for contempt of court.
Contempt of court. Now, what does that even mean? I mean, was he, like, shouting at the judge or something?
It's a little more complicated than that, but basically it means you're disobeying or being disrespectful to the court's authority. So in this case, Burke was told to stay away from the school while they were figuring things out legally.
Wow.
But he kept showing up, and that's ultimately what landed him in prison.
So I'm already seeing this isn't just about pronouns. This is about freedom of religion.
Free speech.
Challenging authority. And you know what's great is we actually have Burke's own words, like spoken right after he was released, so we can hear his perspective straight from him.
And when you hear him speak, you can tell this is really, really personal for him. He doesn't hold back. He calls prison, a sad place. And he says he feels like the state has really let him down.
There's something about his words, like there's an intensity to them. He keeps repeating, I am not free.
Yeah.
Even though he's out of prison, it's like he's saying, this isn't over.
For him, it wasn't just about following some rule at school. He felt like he was being forced to accept and endorse transgenderism, which he believes goes against his Christian faith. And, he sees it as a direct attack on his belief that God created people as male and female.
It's interesting because he even goes as far as to compare being asked to use a student's preferred pronouns to a principal ordering him to, like, jump out of a window.
It's a pretty extreme comparison.
It is a leap.
But I think that shows just how strongly he feels that his religious freedom was violated.
Yeah.
He argues the court should have looked at whether this school's demand was even okay in the first place before they went and punished him for not doing it.
And he's claiming he was denied his constitutional rights to, express his religious beliefs and opinions freely.
And that's where things get really interesting.
That's how.
Because in Ireland, you have the freedom of religion. That's protected.
Right.
But there are also laws against hate speech and discrimination.
So where's the line?
Exactly. Where is that line between expressing your religious beliefs and, potentially hurting other people?
That's a tricky line to find.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have to think about, like, the impact of all this on the transgender student at the center of it all.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we don't have access to that student's perspective, based on the sources that we have. But it is really, really important to remember that they are a real person who's been deeply affected by all of this.
All right, this isn't just an academic debate. These are real people's lives.
Exactly. Their well-being is a crucial part of this whole story.
And Burke actually talks about this one specific event that he says really kicked off this whole chain of events. It was an email that he got from Principal McShane back in May of 2022.
Oh, yeah.
He's saying that in the email, the principal demanded that he call a male student a boy by the next day. Like, that email was a line in the sand for him.
That email really is key because it's that first clash between what Burke believes and the school's policies. For Burke, it became a symbol of this pressure he felt to conform to an ideology he couldn't support.
And it's not just Burke voicing these concerns.
No.
There's this person with him after he's released. It sounds like maybe a legal representative or a really strong supporter. And they take it a step further.
Oh, yeah.
They're framing this as like a much wider societal issue.
They're saying that Burke isn't truly free because his imprisonment hangs over his head. Like, if he keeps expressing his beliefs, they could put him back in prison. And they argue that that potential for punishment is basically silencing not just Burke, but anyone else who might want to challenge the current views on transgender rights.
Yeah, like it's creating this chilling effect.
Exactly.
Where people are afraid to speak up because they don't want to be punished or ostracized.
Exactly. And, they're painting a pretty bleak picture. They say people are just too scared to challenge the dominant ideologies out there, especially when it comes to transgender rights. And they're saying there's a real danger of dissenting voices being completely silenced.
And they even go on to accuse the Department of Education of being complicit in all of this. They say that they're tricking teachers and families into accepting and promoting what they call transgender ideology.
Right, and they use really strong language. They call this ideology of hell and anti-Christian. And that really shows just how deeply rooted this whole debate is. It gets down to really fundamental beliefs about good and evil.
Okay, so things are definitely getting heated here.
Yeah.
But what about the legal side of things?
Hmm.
Like, is there actually a legal right to refuse to endorse transgenderism, like they're saying?
That's where things get a bit murky. There's no specific law in Ireland that says you can just refuse to acknowledge someone's gender identity.
Okay.
But freedom of religion and conscience, those are protected rights.
Right.
So that's the space where Burke supporters are trying to make their case.
So it sounds like we're dealing with a real legal and philosophical knot here.
Yeah.
No easy answers.
No easy answers. It's a real clash of rights and values. And it's not just happening in courtrooms. This is playing out in schools,
Workplaces.
communities all over the world.
And this is really just the beginning, right? We're going to explore what happened before Burke ended up in prison.
Oh, yeah.
And, hear the arguments from the other sides of this debate. And look at what this all means moving forward.
We've just scratched the surface. What I think is so interesting about this whole case is that it forces us to face some really difficult questions about how we balance individual rights with the need for a fair and inclusive society for everyone.
Right. It's a question of how do we all live together with all of our differences.
Exactly.
So stick around, folks. This deep dive is just getting started.
This is like watching, a slow motion train wreck between deeply held religious beliefs
Right.
and this evolving understanding of gender identity.
This fast.
And it's going way beyond just this one guy in this one school.
When you look back on this whole thing, it really seems like it all started with that email from the principal that Burke keeps talking about.
Yeah.
He sees it as the school trying to force him to do something he doesn't believe in.
Right.
But I'm curious, what was the school thinking?
Well, we don't have any, secret school documents or anything, or statements from the principal, but we can look at it from a bigger perspective, like what schools do in general.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools, especially lately, have been trying to make things more inclusive for transgender students.
Makes sense.
So that means things like respecting their chosen names and pronouns.
So maybe the school was just trying to do what they thought was best.
Yeah, like they have a responsibility to protect their students.
Especially students who might be more vulnerable.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And legally, schools have to prevent harassment and discrimination
Of course.
based on gender identity.
Right.
So if a student asks to be called by a certain pronoun,
Yeah.
the school might see that as part of their legal obligation.
Okay, so they feel like they have to do it.
Basically.
But Burke supporters are saying the school is pushing a specific agenda.
Right. One they see as harmful and wrong.
Mm.
And this is where things get really tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because for Burke and his supporters, this isn't just about, being nice to a student.
Right.
It's a clash of worldviews.
Okay.
They see it as a battle against what they think is this dangerous trend.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional values getting eroded, a radical agenda being imposed.
Mm.
It's a really big deal to them.
They're even comparing Burke to people in history who stood up for what they believed in, even when they were persecuted.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, like he's a martyr or something.
Exactly. It taps into this fear of change.
People feeling like the world is changing too fast.
And their values are under attack.
Okay, so it's not just about pronouns.
Definitely not.
It's about something much bigger.
Right. A whole way of life.
But what are the actual legal arguments that Burke's supporters are using?
They're mostly focused on freedom of conscience and religion.
Which are protected in Ireland, right?
Yep, right there in the Constitution.
Okay.
They say that making Burke use words that go against his religious beliefs
Yeah.
is a violation of those rights.
So even in his job, he shouldn't have to say things he doesn't believe.
That's their argument.
And that brings up a big question.
Definitely.
How do you balance individual beliefs with the need for everyone to feel safe and included?
That's the million-dollar question.
Especially in a school where you have to look out for the kids.
Exactly.
It's tricky.
It really is. It's like you're trying to balance two sets of rights.
And they're in direct conflict.
Yeah, it's not easy to figure out.
And it's not just about being right or wrong.
It's about how we want to live together.
Yeah, like what kind of society do we want?
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so interesting. It shows the struggles we're all facing.
As the world changes.
Yeah, traditional values being challenged.
New ideas about identity and diversity.
And inclusion.
It's like we're at a crossroads.
And the path we choose now will have a big impact.
So Burke's out of prison, but this story isn't over.
Nope, not by a long shot.
He could still face more legal trouble.
Right, and the school is still trying to figure things out.
And this whole thing has sparked a huge debate
Oh yeah, a huge one.
about free speech, religion, transgender rights.
It's happening everywhere.
So how do we even start to make sense of all of this?
Well, I think one of the most important questions is how do we balance freedom of expression with the need to make everyone feel safe and included,
Especially in schools.
especially in schools?
Because we want people to be free to speak their minds.
Right.
But we also have to recognize that words can hurt.
Exactly. They can have a real impact.
Another big question is, how do we deal with the tension between religious beliefs and, changing social norms?
Yeah, because in a society where everyone has different beliefs,
There are bound to be clashes.
definitely. And this case really highlights that.
It's like, how do we make space for everyone?
It's a tough one.
And it also makes us think about the limits of free speech.
Because it's not absolute. Right.
Like, you can't just say anything you want,
Especially if it's hate speech or could lead to violence.
or if it's going to hurt other people.
Exactly. Finding those limits is a constant challenge.
It sounds like this case has opened up a whole can of worms.
You could say that.
No easy answers.
No easy answers at all.
So what do we do?
Well, I think the most important thing is to talk about these issues thoughtfully,
Even when we disagree.
even when it's hard.
Because we're all in this together.
Yeah, we have to find a way to live together.
And maybe that's the main takeaway from all of this.
What do you mean?
That we need to be open to different viewpoints.
And have those tough conversations.
Because it's the only way to move forward.
You're right.
So to our listeners, we're handing it over to you.
Yeah, what do you think?
What would you do if you were in Enoch Burke's shoes?
Or the parent of a transgender student.
Or a teacher trying to navigate this whole mess? It's not just some thought experiment.
Right, these are real issues, real people dealing with this stuff.
And, as we've been talking about this case, it's really become clear that this is about way more than just, a legal fight.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's about some really fundamental stuff.
Identity, belief, what kind of world we want to live in.
Exactly. And one thing that really struck me is that the law can only take you so far.
That's true.
Like, laws are important, of course,
Absolutely.
but they can't solve everything.
People are messy.
Right.
Right.
And sometimes laws, they clash with each other, or they just haven't caught up with, how we understand things.
Yeah, like things change and the law takes time to catch up.
Exactly. And in those cases, we need more than just like what's written down.
We need to look at the bigger picture.
Fairness, compassion, making sure everyone is treated with dignity.
Those are the things that matter.
It sounds like we need to move past this, like us versus them kind of thinking.
Absolutely.
And remember that we're all human, even when we disagree.
I think that's so important.
Yeah, it's easy to demonize people who see things differently.
It's easy to get caught up in the fight.
Right. But if we want to actually solve these problems,
We need to be willing to listen,
even when it's hard,
even when we really, really disagree,
we need to understand where people are coming from.
and try to find some common ground.
Yeah, because everyone has their own story, their own experiences that shape how they see the world.
And those experiences are valid.
Right, even if we don't agree with the conclusions.
Exactly.
So maybe that's the biggest takeaway from this deep dive.
What do you mean?
That these really complicated social issues, they need us to think carefully.
Yeah, nuance is key.
And to be willing to talk to each other.
Real dialogue, not just shouting matches.
Exactly. And that's something we all have to do, not just the people making the laws.
Right, that's on all of us.
It's about recognizing that, building a better society,
A fairer society, a more inclusive society.
it's a process. And we all have a part to play.
And we're all learning as we go.
Well said. I think this has been a really, really insightful deep dive.
I agree.
Not just learning about Enoch Burke's case, but also about the bigger challenges we're facing as a society.
It's a reminder that there are no easy answers.
But that doesn't mean we give up.
There's always room for growth, for understanding, for progress.
And it starts with asking the tough questions
Listening to different perspectives.
and being willing to, question our own assumptions.
Absolutely.
Because it's in those tough conversations, those moments of discomfort.
That's where real change happens.
That's where we can start to build a better world.
A world where everyone feels seen and heard and respected.
Well, listeners, we've explored the case, looked at all the complexities, and now it's your turn.
What do you think?
The Enoch Burke case, it's a stark example of the challenges we face.
No easy answers.
It's about empathy, thoughtful dialogue, and understanding.
Even when it's hard.
So, how do we navigate these times? What are your thoughts?
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep,